The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Almighty and eternal God, so draw our hearts to you, so guide our minds, so fill our imaginations, so control our wills, that we may be wholly yours, utterly dedicated unto you. And then use us, we pray you, as you will, and always to your glory and the welfare of your people, through our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, everybody, I'd like to officially welcome you to the Episcopal Diocese of Louisiana's series, With God's Help, Faith-Filled Conversations in Uncertain Times. I am the Reverend Canon Morgan McIntyre, and I will be your moderator this evening. Throughout the series, Bishop Shannon Duckworth has been exploring the 5 questions of our baptismal covenant, and tonight we will turn our attention to the 4th question. Will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? Bishop Shannon, will you please introduce your guest?
I am so happy to. So when I was growing up, I was a Girl Scout, and we used to sing a song, make new friends, but keep the old. One is silver and the other is gold. And Ollie falls into the category of gold, not only just in who he is as a person and as a priest, but as a friend, a lifelong friend. And as I was thinking about who to invite to be a part of this conversation, just immediately came to mind. And I'm so very grateful that he is a part of this. So just want to give you a little bit of information about Father Ollie Rencher. Since 2018, he has been the Rector of Grace-St. Luke's in Memphis, Tennessee. He worked in and served in the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina, also in Mississippi at St. Peter's and Oxford and the University of Mississippi. He collaborates with members of the Grace-St. Luke staff. There is a vibrant school that's connected to the parish with the head of school and leadership team and board of trustees. He is a phenomenal musician and has a beautiful voice if you've ever had a chance to get to hear him sing. He is married to Ellie, who works at St. Jude and has an incredible ministry and resume herself. So the two of them are wonderful partners in ministry. And we have shared many, many life events with each other. And so to be able to bring this all to this point and to have this conversation is truly a joy. So welcome, Ollie. We're so happy you're here.
Thank you.
Okay, so the question that we've asked, I said I've stole a little bit from Krista Tippett. She always asks same question to start her podcast. So my question for you, Ollie, is who has been the most influential person in your spiritual life?
Well, thank you, Bishop Shannon, and thank you for the introduction. I'm just delighted to be here, and I've been excited about this since you first invited me, and so I will make sure that I stay on time with all of my excitement. Thinking about this question, my parents, although very, very instrumental in my formation, my paternal grandfather would be the most influential person in my journey. His name was Ollie. Also, he was a United Methodist clergy. Lived in Holly Springs, Mississippi, and he lived to be 103 years old. A very wise, thoughtful soul. And although we lived 2 hours away in the Mississippi Delta, we spent most of our time over there when we could. And he help me ask the questions, be the listener, give me the faith, give me the courage, all the things that I still look to today when I write, when I preach. He's very much a part of my life, has influenced me in ways that I could never imagine. So my paternal grandfather, Ollie Levi Rencher of blessed memory.
Nice. So Ollie, tell us, was there a particular time or moment that you can share with us about a particular piece of advice that he gave you, or, you were sharing some time together and he said something to you that you have carried with you in your ministry?
Oh, he said so much. I'd have to think, when I think about the times we spent together, in the years of my high school age, when I was probably 15, 16 years old, I had moved from the United Methodist Church to the Roman Catholic Church on my way to the Episcopal Church, obviously. And he was a great listener during that time. And a lot of what I remember that would be a consistent sort of theme he would have, he would talk about courage and kindness.
Mm,
He talked a lot about courage and kindness. And many times, whenever I would think about courage, I thought that courage meant that one had to be tough,
hmm
and that's not the same thing. And so there was something about him reflecting on courage and kindness that should be how I approach life. And this was long before ordained ministry of any sort. But those two words, that wisdom, is something that keeps showing up a lot for me, courage and kindness.
So, taking courage and kindness and thinking about it in terms of this question that we have for you tonight. Will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? A part of why I'm doing this podcast is I felt like we needed to have a particular voice in this time, and to try to find our voice as Episcopalians and as both clergy, and also as lay people. So, how do you think courage and kindness has informed or informs that question in the baptismal covenant, just specifically in your ministry? And feel free to share a little bit about Grace St. Luke's, and obviously you've got not only a parish but a school that you're associated with. So share that. How do you think those two things go together?
Well, I'm in a unique setting. I serve as rector of the parish, but also rector of the school, which has a separate head of school that is in charge of the day-to-day operations of the school. But we have just under 470 students, pre-K through eighth grade. And there's chapel 3 days a week. There's special events on Fridays. And so the audience of the school, I'm very much in front of at any given time. And of course, in our parish, which is a thriving community, we have a lot of inreach, but we have a lot of outreach and justice ministry in our parish. And one of the things that continues to show up is how we treat one another is at the core of all that we talk about. We talk about it in the school, we talk about it in the church, it comes through in sermons, it takes us all back to the gospel. And so that question of the baptismal covenant about loving your neighbor as yourself, seeking Christ in all persons, it's it's fundamental, I would say, to how the ministry happens at Grace St. Luke's and what we do on a regular basis. It's a part of conversations and vestry meetings and our clergy staff meetings each week. It's a part of how we greet neighbors who may be without, who come to us seeking assistance and are a part of ministries that we host at the parish or that we do in partnership with Church Health. We have a food pantry that we partnered with a local organization called Church Health, and how we go about providing meals that are healthy meals on a weekly basis through partnership, all is rooted in how we treat one another. We've had some of the conversations when we have trained ushers, for instance, and
Mm.
talked about how we receive people who may come in that are not used to our space, nor are we used to them being in our space, and to be kind to them, to treat them as though they were family. And even the family member you haven't seen in a long time, where there's naturally maybe some distance, right? You still are finding a way to be intentional about the hospitality and seeing Christ in them, even if it's new, and to see the face of God, the line, seeing the face of God in another is something that comes up a lot. And so I see a lot of connection in that question of the covenant. And we're in the process of preparing candidates now
Mm.
for baptism, but mostly for confirmation and reception. The bishop's visitation is coming on All Saints. So this is very fresh and a part of our retreats that we've been doing over the last several weeks in preparation. So.
So moving this idea about courage, and you said that he said that was not just about being like strong in the sense of like like muscle strong, right? But having courage also comes from a certain place within yourself, within sort of tending to your soul, to look, like you're saying now, being welcoming to other people. And I over and over and over again, people are saying to me, where do I find courage right now? Like, so let me ask you this. So where do you go to feed yourself
Hmm.
in your journey, to find that courage that your grandfather was talking about? So that's like the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, how has your preaching about courage changed in the last, since, let's just say, since you've been at Grace-St. Luke's? I mean, you're in there longer. They know you better. You kind of can, you can push maybe a little bit more on things.
Right.
So, to the things, what feeds you, and then how has your voice changed in that idea? Because I think courage is definitely connected to that fourth question of the baptismal covenant.
Well, thank you. So my prayers, I I live in my prayers, because that's a place where I get the strength that I need for each day. Prayers of gratitude, prayers where I ask God to continue to be known to me in those ways that I may not even know are possible. And I trust in God in a way that allows me to have a certain peace, even in the wrestling with of the world and the things that continue to upset us all and keep us anxious. There's something about being in a very deep prayer life. I've been involved since 2001 with the Society of St. John the Evangelist, which is the Cowley Fathers, the brothers, the monks up at Cambridge, Massachusetts, and being associated with the rule of life and how important prayer is, and intentionality. So when I think about what keeps me grounded when things are really, really hard and many times seem impossible, I go back to my prayers and I go back to that trust. And I think about ancestors, not just my ancestors, but all of the people who've gone before me and how they're still here to tell the story in some way, through their memories and through their memoirs and the stories that I have from them. And so those things have helped me personally, but also then to your question, it's helped to inform my preaching. It has been something over the years to pay attention to what I observe as a society that is not as courageous as we could be.
Hmm.
I think it's for all the reasons that it's lonely to be courageous, and maybe we think that we don't want to be the only one who's out there. And I say courage when I think about it is really doing what is right, doing what we know to be right by God, by the examples of Jesus and what he has always taught us to do and how to be. And so the more I've decided to preach that more. My voice, preaching wise, has leaned in more to an invitation for courage,
Hmm.
because when we face all the isms of this world, whatever the ism, normally it continues because there has been an absence of courage. Someone has not been willing to stand up for what is right, or stand up for the other, or stand up for one's own integrity. And that I see all of that is tied to courage, but it's hard, and it can be lonely. But that is a part of, what does it mean to be Christian, right? The old line of being fools for Christ.
Mm-hmm.
It's putting ourselves out there, but and trusting that the rest will fall into place. So those have been shifts over the years for me, and there hasn't been like a one moment as much as observing more and more where the world seems to be lacking courage and individuals aren't willing for whatever reason, to step out in faith and trust that God will be there. So
Leadership in these times really does matter. And yesterday, of course, the gospel is a challenging one. And my wonderful Canon of the Ordinary, we were talking about chasms, and And she said, well, the thing that bridges chasms is curiosity. If you're not curious about another person, then curiosity is what causes us to be able to engage in those conversations, to have the courage. It takes courage to even step into that, because we can say, well, you're this or you're that, or you're in this block and I'm in this block. And I really am not curious at all as to who you are, what you stand for, why you say the things that you do. And so I just was thinking about it as you were talking about courage. In order to have courage, you have to be curious at the same
Yes.
time. So,
Yes.
I had someone write me after I preached yesterday and said that they had a family member had died, and they grew up in an evangelical household, and there was this whole conversation about whether or not this family member was saved and was going to go to heaven and all of that. Well, they died. And in the sermon, the pastor used the scripture from yesterday to say that this family member was now in hell, right? And I read the email and I just recoiled. And she said, thank you for sort of turning this gospel for me, because obviously it has been used in my family as a battering ram, right? So I guess what I'm thinking about, and Ollie, you walk through life in such a beautiful way, and also with deep spirituality. And I know that your congregation looks for you to help them make those changes. But can you tell us a story about a time where you've preached a sermon about courage and maybe curiosity, where someone came to you, and you don't have to use names or obviously like that, but they came to you and said, my whole perspective on this has turned 180 degrees. I know it's kind of a tough maybe question to answer on the spot, but do you have something that you can share with us about that?
I do, because of the subject matter.
Yeah.
Uh, this was a particular sermon when I was basically reflecting on the reality of the sin of racism,
Mm.
and speaking in love and talking about the imago Dei, the image of God that is each of us. And I don't remember the exacts of my words, but I remember the context of it was, whenever we are in the presence of another, we're in the presence of God, and that other person is the image of God. And I stressed that in several ways, and that was something for this particular person that had never fully registered.
Hmm.
And to say, basically, is when you look at that person who's most unlike you and the person who's closest to you, even that family member that may not be someone that you, even if you love them but don't like them. And I had a big joke about, you don't have to like people, but you do have to love them, and how much fun you could have around that. You think about all the people that we have issue with, but we're called to love them. But that's another conversation. But the the whole understanding of the other person is God in your midst, is God in my midst. And if I understood that, if the world understood that, if we embodied that, imagine who we would become.
Yeah.
But that takes courage, or it just takes the simplicity to be curious, thinking about what you shared about what the canon shared as well about being curious. That other person is also God's image. And if we really understand that the other person is God's image, things will be different. It doesn't say that things won't be hard, but they will be different. And so that was the context of a sermon that someone was struck by and wanted to talk more about. And we actually had several conversations after that, just about the hard work around racial healing, as an example, and that journey that is life, the life work of racial healing, came out of that particular conversation. So,
Well, when you and I talked briefly on Saturday about this conversation, I asked you if you wouldn't mind answering, stepping more into that question about racism, especially in Memphis,
Yes.
where so much of the story of racial reckoning and civil rights happened, and the death of Martin Luther King Jr., his assassination. And your congregation is deep in the center of Memphis. It is not,
Correct.
you're just a few miles from where all this took place. How has that informed your work towards racial healing, and maybe share with us some joys that have happened, and maybe also some obstacles? Because Ollie, what I think, maybe this is what I struggle with is I want to do the work, and then sometimes what's coming at me just feels so antithetical to what I'm trying to communicate that I just want to throw my hands up and say I can't. So anyways, share with us a little bit about that piece of the journey for you.
Sure. I think about my life growing up, and who I am, my parents, life in the Mississippi Delta, parents who, my mother who's still living is 91. If my father was still living, he would be 92. The things that they saw, so the things that were part of this life for them, and then the things, of course, that became life for us, and the lessons and the stories that we had growing up. And so all of those things have informed, who I am and how I approach it. And so I've been hearing since I was a child that all people are equal regardless of how they act. That was a line.
Mm,
Regardless of how they act, we're all equal because we're images of God. So that's something that I sort of take into spaces wherever I go. And so, thinking about the context and the city of Memphis and how close that is to Clarksdale, and going to Memphis a lot, for instance, as a child, and it was a big deal to go to Liberty Land and go shopping. That was the bigger city from the Delta to go up, an hour and 20 minutes away. And so, hearing so much about Memphis, but now living there and being close to the stories and to the places of those sacred spaces where so much took place in the name of human and civil rights, and where Dr. King was assassinated, and the work that's being done by different organizations in the city, I get to see it firsthand. And one of the initiatives that's happening in our parish and throughout the diocese is the program called Sacred Ground, which you
mm-hmm.
may be familiar with. But Grace St. Luke's, our parish, has been involved with it and has had several graduates of the program, and are preparing in the winter and spring to have another group of persons who will participate in Sacred Ground. And then there's also a recent Memphis civil rights pilgrimage that was led by a group of ecumenical leaders, and I actually participated in it last week. And Dr. Catherine Meeks
Mm-hmm.
was with us for 3 days as a part of that experience. And so that's timely that you asked the question, because it's work that's being done, it's work that's evolving, it's work that's hard to do, especially when there are so many things that an individual is carrying at any given point, and a person can only do so much, right?
Right.
I do believe that people are doing the best that they can most days,
Mm-hmm.
because whatever life is whatever life is. And so what might be a priority for me may not be a priority for them, but that doesn't mean that that person doesn't care. And
Right.
I do believe that wholeheartedly. But I also do believe that people have a responsibility to learn more so that the world can be more healed. And so I haven't had those sort of bigger challenges as much as I've had where people talk about just the magnitude of the work and it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
So if there were a place where there feels like a tension at times, it's just so heavy and it's so much. So where does that person start? To your very own point, where does that happen? How do you do that work? And for what it's worth, I often remind the person that racial healing is life work. So that's the work that's happening until a person leaves this earth. So it's not something that'll happen over the course of 2 years of reading a lot or going to a lot of retreats, or doing some occasional march. It's life work, it's spiritual work, it's very hard inner work, and it's rewarding work, of course. So if that gives you just some glimpse into context and what's always happening and things that are continuing to, what I would say, improve and become better and more people to be involved. So
Had your congregation? I mean, I certainly know well. You're a former rector.
yes.
Um, uh, so is this been something that the congregation has been involved in? I mean, like from the history, were they involved in civil rights? Did they? Is this something they've worked towards over the years?
There was less of a historical and what I would call an institutional commitment
Hmm.
to doing the work around racial healing. That was not a part of our longer history, but over time that changed just through people being more intentional. Rectors and vestries and others just being more intentional is really what I've inherited. And so now, just because of my own call to healing, it's something that we discuss a lot, and we have programming to help support people who want to be involved. And that has in turn affected some of how we continue to change in the racial makeup of our parish as we become increasingly non-white,
Hmm.
in a way that is very organic and prayerful. And it's not a part of a goal that anyone has per se, but it's just about being authentic and being very intentional about belonging. And people who visit, who are drawn to our liturgy, drawn to hospitality, drawn to our programming, many of whom had less history with the Episcopal Church, but possibly they did in another city or maybe even another parish locally, have decided to continue to be a part of us. And that's very humbling to experience, but that also is a change just for our historical landscape, I would say, for the parish.
You've said a couple of things that really stick out to me and really resonate with me and I don't know that I've heard, I mean, I've heard it in certain ways, but for you to say this is really a lifelong journey, this is not a weekend or a retreat but that and I think that takes some of, that makes you, like you said, or it's more organic. It's just more a part of the DNA of the congregation that, it's in vestries meetings, it's in planning, it's in stewardship, and so little bit by little bit, you get to sort of plant those seeds within the context of your community. And then in turn, the community shifts and changes. And so there's more opportunity to bridge those chasms, to have those conversations, to be courageous, to
Yes.
be kind. And folks can pick out when you're just, when they're just doing it because they feel like they have to. But
Yes.
really genuine hospitality comes from a much different place. And that sounds
Yes.
like what you're doing.
Yes.
I also know that you've been a big support to your bishop, who is a good friend of mine as well. I know that you've been really helpful to her as in her ministry and in the
Great respect
diocese.
for her. I
Yeah,
do. I do.
yeah.
Thank you.
Um, so okay, so in the last 5 minutes, see, I ask you questions for 30, and then I'll give myself 5. But anyway, I'm on the spot for you. What questions do you have for me?
Oh,
Anything that's yeah. So yeah, I could.
I
It's fair.
can
It's
do
fair. I got to
this for a
exactly.
moment, rub my hands together. Is that
Yep.
right? Let's see. I'm aware of the amazing work that's happening in the Diocese of Louisiana. I read a lot. I know people from throughout the diocese, lay persons, ordained persons, people who have lived there before and live elsewhere. And I just think about all the hard work that's happening in that diocese. And my question for you would be, as we, for instance, are talking about the lifelong work of racial healing, how do you see that unfolding as a part of your leadership and the lay and ordained persons with whom you work? because it is that hard and very sensitive personal work, what things possibly in strategic planning and conversations with the standing committee, with the diocesan staff, clergy conferences, what what vision, as it were, have you considered in that particular regard? As far as lifelong things, there are
Hmm.
programs, of course, that have been happening for a long time, and you've joined into that ministry. But if you could speak about the work around racial healing in the Diocese of Louisiana and what it is now and what it could look like.
Well, what I can
No
say that
pressure, but that was the question.
no, it's good. It's a good question. When I was in the election process for bishop, I kept a journal and I wrote down pages and pages and pages of journaling. And one of the things that I kept coming back to was Francis Joseph Godet,
Mm,
who we claim as our saint. I mean, she's in the Book of Occasional Services, but Lesser Fees Are Fast, and she is such an incredible icon of work, and as a woman in her time, as a woman of color, what she was able to accomplish. And so out of that has grown what we call our Godet Umbrella Ministries. And Tamika Gerhart is on this call. I saw her a second ago. And so our priority for me as bishop was to align the staff in such a way to make that work, which is racial healing, creation care, youth and young adult ministry, LGBTQ plus, and I said creation care already. Did I help me with? Did I leave anybody out? Okay, help me out here. Hispanic, Latino Hispanic ministry. So, because what I saw it was that all of these things, you can't talk about racial healing without talking about injustices in our environment, and we can't talk. Our youth. We're going to be doing a pilgrimage to Jackson actually in the spring. So, getting our youth involved with pilgrimage ministry, there are ways in which the LGBTQ plus community, just how and how race is connected into that, and so I thought, it makes a statement to be able to have someone in that position that is doing that mission or work. And then I really want to see like everything we do sort of flowing in and out of that. When we put together our budget, what are we lining up so that we can support that ministry and support Tamika and support our other missioners and clergy and lay people who head up these ministries. With racial healing, we are looking at sacred ground. We did racial healing work for a long time, but we found that it was wonderful, but a Saturday day was not the long-term work of racial healing that we really wanted to be able and to go into the parishes to establish groups of people that know each other and can talk to each other and be vulnerable with each other. And
right.
as you said, in the spirit of Brene Brown, that folks are mostly doing the best they can, and then how do we use that to have these hard conversations? So, what I'll say is, it's in everything. It's in our communications. It's in our little box of good news, which is our home parenting offering for families. It's in the work that I do when Canon McIntyre does searches, making sure that that congregations are wrestling with bias that they may have going into search processes. So it's an important and long-term goal of mine that the Diocese of Louisiana is going to be hopefully known for this work around this, especially with Francis Joseph Godet as the one who inspires us.
Well, thank you. Because that is a challenge for any bishop in any context. It's not about a Southern bishop or a non-Southern bishop. That is an American story. It's a worldwide story, but our particular story is probably the most complicated,
It is.
in my opinion, for a lot of reasons. So, but
And
thank you.
especially coming for you coming out of the Mississippi Delta. I mean, that's a whole other podcast for us to have that
Yes, right.
conversation. So,
Yes,
but I love the fact that your parents what they what they sort of laid down as a non-negotiable in your family that has carried with you and
yes,
informed your ministry. I think it's really important and beautiful because we have an opportunity to make the difference in our families' lives and our children's lives. So,
yes. Well, thank you.
all right, Cannon McIntyre, would you mind
We do
asking our
have a
questions?
question. We have this question is for Father Ollie from Andrew Doss. He asks, have you faced a moment recently that you'd be willing to share in which you've taken a courageous stand that has caused another to express disappointment or even hurt? How did you handle that?
Yes. One of it was connected to, it's interesting, we were talking earlier about race and a sermon. And a person in particular approached me and was very clear that, in their opinion, we were talking too much about race and that we needed to leave race and other such things out of the pulpit. And I shouldn't write about them and shouldn't be so intentional and as if there were an agenda of some sort. And my response was, I'm continuing to be faithful to the gospel, and I'm not speaking about or writing about anything that is not true about what Jesus expects all of us to be. And that's not something that I'll change. I said, if I'm ever not preaching the gospel or speaking about the ways and what Jesus teaches us, that's a different conversation. That's a different request of me because I want to make sure that I'm always being faithful to my vows and to the gospel. And that person was there expressed their disappointment, and I simply explained to them that I hope that we can continue to be in relationship and hope that they will remain engaged in the life of the parish and to trust that nothing is connected to an agenda. It's connected to the gospel, and the gospel has always been the hardest message for any of us to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And that applies to me as well. And my grandfather's line that I spoke about earlier, he says that if you ever preach a sermon that's not directed to you, you should sit down.
I love that. Just sit down.
So, so
Yeah.
I'm preaching, quote, to myself
Mm-hmm.
when I'm speaking hard truths in love. And there's no malice or resentment or anger at a person or a group of people. And so I was hurt by this person's, I understood why they may feel the way they felt and was hurt by sort of the disrespect. And at the same time, I've still been in relationship with this person, but that was a very a courageous moment, I would say. So thank you for the question.
Do we have any other questions?
Not yet. I have one, but I don't want to steal anybody else's opportunity. So,
Jump on in. We got time.
well, this is an interesting question. So, I love all this conversation about courageous preaching and curiosity and the situation you just described with the parishioner and how you were able to engage them in conversation about your sermon. I mean, good on them for telling you that they had an issue, right? Because it opened up the opportunity for conversation. So I was wondering if you have any tips or thoughts for those of us who are supplying a whole lot and who are preaching oftentimes in congregations and where we don't have that relationship and often don't get the opportunity to engage people in conversation. How would you suggest a supply priest
Mm.
goes about having these courageous moments in preaching, and how would you suggest they navigate that in front of a congregation that they largely do not have a relationship with?
Wow. Um, that's a hard one, but what immediately comes to mind is because I am very relational, so I can appreciate what you're asking. I think if the preacher is setting the context for what they're about to say versus just saying it and hoping as if people will be okay, I think that I think that would just be careless, because we can be prophetic and still be thoughtful and respectful.
Mm.
I believe. So to even say in the preaching something I've been wrestling with, and you possibly have been too, some of you maybe more than others, this is on my mind. After the service, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So you have opened yourself to be in some level of relationship and even say, you don't know me and I don't know you. But as I look at this gospel, I cannot help but think X, or it makes me think of X, and remain in conversation where whatever was written in the sermon, if it doesn't shift into what could feel like some level of conversation building, even though it's not a talkback sermon, which there are talkback sermons. Some of you possibly are in communities where that happens, but there's not an opportunity to do that. And so you sometimes you just have one shot when you give that sermon. So to be, I would say, to be more careful while trying to be prophetic, and to ask, maybe say, some of this might be new. It was new to me until 2 years ago. And so we've, as the preacher, have opened ourselves to a vulnerability versus what could be received as an expert or something, or a judgment, right? And I know I have felt that way. And I think anybody who's on this Zoom has felt judged or felt like it was almost personal by the preacher. And that's a very uncomfortable feeling. So
That I think
that's
that's
what
a
immediately comes to mind, just thinking about moving around a lot and not having relationships about hard things, especially. So,
I love that because I think that applies to really whether you're a layperson in a congregation, if you're leading a new gathering of people, if you're welcoming someone new, or if you're in a pulpit, or I mean, I'm in a different pulpit every year, every week. But to start with, this is where I am. I want you to know a little bit about me. And also, I want to know a little bit about you. And I'm going to give this piece, and then I'm inviting more conversation. I'm inviting more courage and curiosity and kindness. I mean, to me, that's to take some of the finger pointing out. Then people get less defensive because really, ultimately, what you realize, of course, is they're a lot more in common than not.
yes,
So
yes.
I want to tell you one quick story before we wrap up about SSJE, which is Society of St. John the Evangelist that Ollie mentioned. I was on retreat and I got there late and my plane was late and all of that. So they had already started the worship service. I'd never been there before. And Ollie knows this well, it has lots of little hallways and lots of brown doors. And I had no idea where I was going. And so I put my bag down and the person said, just head on to chapel, jump on in. So I got there and I just saw a brown door. And so I opened up the door and it was not to the chapel, but it was to the sacristy, which is the room, for those who are not church people who might be on the call or listening, it's the kind of the gathering room, the prep room before you go into the church. And the monks were standing in a circle praying before they went in. And I walked in, 90 to nothing. And I stopped dead. I was horrified. And I wanted just to crawl back, and disappear. And you know what they did? They were in the circle and one of the monks reached back and opened up a spot for me
Mm.
and just didn't say a word, just said, come on in, and brought me into the circle and I prayed with them. It still gives
Wow.
me chill bumps to think about it.
Yes.
And so sometimes it doesn't mean a whole lot but it meant everything to me.
Yes.
And he showed hospitality. He showed kindness. He showed, courage and curiosity. By just saying, here's this random person who's coming in on two wheels. They clearly need prayer, but you're part of us, right?
Right.
You're part of us. So, all right, Cannon McIntyre, anything else any other questions or
I
anything
think
else?
that wraps up our questions. So thank you all for joining us again. This podcast is the fourth of five in the series With God's Help, Faith-Filled Conversations in Uncertain Times. Your host is Bishop Shannon Duckworth. Today's guest was the Reverend Ollie V. Rencher, and I am the Reverend Canon Morgan McIntyre. This podcast was edited by Cyril Rose and is produced by the Episcopal Diocese of Louisiana. Join us next month for our guest, the Right Reverend Jeff Mello, Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Connecticut. For more from the Episcopal Diocese of Louisiana, follow us on social media and on our website at edola.org. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Ollie. Thank you so much. Blessings.